Hello everyone, welcome. We are going to be reading the Crystal Shard today. Let me just make sure everything is all set up and ready to go. And it looks like an ad is going to be starting over on Twitch, so just a heads up to everyone. I'm speaking a little softer because Vermilion is asleep in the office, right behind me. So I'm trying to keep a more calm voice for him. And while this isn't technically ASMR, because I do still have my alerts, I just hope you are able to come hang out and enjoy the reading. I'm reading The Crystal Shard for my book club, The Dusty Pages, with Miss Rococo. And I figured I'd read it with you guys. So yeah. I'm currently using the Amazon Kindle app, and I'm using the continuous scroll function. I figured it would work better for me. And just to give a heads up to the listeners, I will be using a reading ruler just to help me keep my place. So let's get that turned on real quick. There we go. And it looks like the ad break is beginning on Twitch, so just a heads up. Alrighty. The Crystal Shard by R.A. Salvatore. Prelude. The demon sat back on the seat it had carved in the stem of the giant mushroom. Sludge slurped and rolled around the rock island, the eternal oozing and shifting that marked the layer of the abyss. I just realized the sound might be a bit too much. You want it to be a subtle fireplace, not an in-your-face fireplace. Okay, that might be better. Anyways, thank you for your patience while I figure this setup out. This is a little new for me and I'm kind of experimenting. Oh. Let's retry that. I realized I wasn't scrolling, so that was kind of messing with the ruler. Anyways. The Crystal Shard by R.A. Salvatore. Prelude. The demon sat back on the seat it had carved in the stem of the giant mushroom. Sludge slurped and rolled around the rock island, the eternal oozing and shifting that marked this layer of the abyss. Ertu drummed its clawed fingers, its horned, ape-like head lolling about on its shoulders as it peered into the gloom. "Where are you, Telshaz?" the demon hissed, expecting news of the relic. Kren Shiniban pervaded all of the demon's thoughts. With the shard in its grasp, Ertu could rise over an entire layer, maybe even several layers. And Ertu had come so close to possessing it. The demon knew the power of the artifact. Ertu had been serving 7 liches when they combined their evil magics and made the Crystal Shard. The liches undead spirits of powerful wizards that refused to rest when their mortal bodies had passed from the realms of the living had gathered to create the most vile artifact ever made, an evil that fed and flourished off that which the purveyors of good considered most precious, the light of the sun. But they had gone beyond even their own considerable powers. the forging actually consumed the 7. Crenshinibon, stealing the magical... Are we back? Oh, OBS. We'll just go back a little bit just to be safe. Alright. But they had gone beyond even their own considerable powers. The forging actually consumed the 7, Crenshinibon stealing the magical strength that preserved the Lich's undead state to fuel its own flickers of life. The ensuing bursts of power had hurtled Ertu back to the abyss, and the demon had presumed the shard destroyed. But Crenshinibon would not be so easily destroyed. Now, centuries later, Ertu had stumbled upon the trail of the crystal shard again, a crystal tower. Crystal Tirith, with a pulsating heart, the exact image of Crenshinibon. Ertu knew the magic was close by. The demon could sense the powerful presence of the relic. If only it could have found the thing earlier. If only it could have grasped. But then Aldemanira had arrived, an angelic being of tremendous power. Aldemanira banished Ertu back to the abyss with a single word. Ertu peered through the swirling smoke and gloom when it heard the sucking footsteps. "Telshaz?" the demon bellowed. "Yes, my master," the small demon answered, cowering as it approached the mushroom throne. "Did he get it?" Ertu roared. "Does Aldemanira have the crystal shard?" Telshaz quivered and whimpered. "Yes, my lord." No, my lord." Ertu's evil red eyes narrowed. "He could not destroy it," the little demon was quick to explain. "Crenshinibon burned his hands." "Ha!" Ertu snorted. "Beyond even the power of Aldemanira. Where is it, then? Did you bring it, or does it remain in the second crystal tower?" Telshaz whimpered again. It didn't want to tell its cruel master the truth, but it would not dare disobey. "No, master, not in the tower," the little demon whispered. "No," Ertu roared. "Where is it?" "Aldemanira threw it." "Threw it?" "Across the plains, merciful master," Telshaz cried, with all of his strength. "Across the very plains of existence," Ertu growled. "Across the very plains of existence," Ertu growled. "I tried to stop him, but..." The horned head shot forward. Telshaz's words gurgled indescribably as Ertu's canine maw tore its throat out. Far removed from the gloom of the abyss, Crenshinibon came to rest upon the world. Far up in the northern mountains of Faerun, the crystal shard, the ultimate perversion, settled into the snow of a bowl-shaped dell and waited. Well, we're off to a wonderful start. Looks like we've potentially met our big bad boy, who just murdered his minion just because he heard something he didn't like. I think we're hyping up a boss fight. I'm kind of hoping for that. Anyways. Part 1, 10 Towns. If I could choose what life would be mine, it would be this life that I now have at this time. I am at peace. and yet the world around me swirls with turmoil, with the ever-present threat of barbarian raids and goblin wars, with tundra yetis and gigantic polar worms. Well, I mean, aside from all that, that's kind of a mood. The reality of existence here in Icewind Dale is harsh indeed, an environment unforgiving where one mistake will cost you your life. That is the joy of the place, the very edge of disaster, and not because of treachery, as I knew in my home in Menzoberranza. I can accept the risks of Icewind Dale. I can revel in them and use them to keep my warrior instincts finely honed. I can use them to remind me every day of the glory and the joy of life. There is no complacency here. In this place, where safety cannot be taken for granted, where a turn of the wind can pile snow over your head, where a single misstep on a boat can put you into water that will steal your breath away and render muscles useless in mere seconds, or a simple lapse of the tundra can put you in the belly of a fierce yeti. When you live with death so close, you come to appreciate life all the more. And when you share that life with friends like those that I have come to know these last years, then you know paradise. Never could I have imagined in my years in Menzoberranza, or in the wilds of the Underdark, or even when I first came to the surface world, that I would ever surround myself with such friends as these. They are different races, all three, and all three different from my own, and yet they are more alike what is in my heart than anyone I have ever known, save perhaps my father, Zaknathane, and the ranger, Montolio, who trained me in the ways of Miliki. I have met many folk up here in 10 Towns, in the savage land of Icewind Dale, who accept me despite my dark elf heritage. And yet, these three, all above all others, have become as family to me. Why them? Why Brunor, Regis, and Cadibri, above all others? 3 friends whom I treasure as much as Guinevere, my companion for all these years. Everyone knows Brunor is as blunt. That is the trademark of many dwarves, but in Brunor, the trait runs pure. Or so he wants all to believe. I know better. I know the other side of Brunor, the hidden side, that soft and warm place. Yes, he has a heart, though he tries hard to bury it. He is blunt, yes, particularly with criticism. He speaks of errors without apology and without judgment, simply telling the honest truth and leaving it up to the offender to correct, or not correct, the situation. Brunor never allows tact or empathy to get in the way of his telling the world how it can be better. That is only half the tale concerning the dwarf. On the other side of the coin, he is far from blunt. Concerning compliments, Brunor is not dishonest, just quiet. Perhaps this is why I love him. I see in him Icewind Dale itself, cold and harsh and unforgiving, but ultimately honest. He keeps me at my best all the time, and in doing that, he helps me to survive in this place. There is only one Icewind Dale, and only one Brunor battle hammer. And if ever I met a creature and a land created for each other. Conversely, Regis stands, or more appropriately reclines, as a reminder to me of the goals and rewards of a job well done. Not that Regis is ever the one who does that job. Regis reminds me, and Brenor, I would guess, that there's more to life than responsibility, that there are times for personal relaxation and enjoyment of the rewards brought about by good work and vigilance. He is too soft for the tundra, too round in the belly, and too slow on his feet. His fighting skills are lacking, and he could not track a herd of caribou on fresh snow. Yet he survives, even thrives up here with wit and attitude, with an understanding better than Brunor's surely, and even better than my own, of how to appease and please those around him, of how to anticipate rather than just react to the moves of others. Regis knows more than just what people do. He knows why they do it. And that ability to understand motivation allowed him to see past the color of my skin and the reputation of my people. If Bernor is honest in expressing his observations, then Regis is honest in following the course of his heart. And finally is Cadibri, wonderful and full of life. Cadibri is the opposite side of the same coin to me, a different reasoning to reach the same conclusions. We are soulmates who see and judge different things in the world to arrive at the same place. Perhaps we thus validate each other. Perhaps in seeing Cadibri arriving at the same place as myself, and knowing that she arrived there along a different road, tells me that I followed my heart truly. Is it that? Do I trust her more than I trust myself? That question is neither indictment of my feelings, nor any self-incrimination. We share beliefs about the way of the world, and the way of the world should be. She is akin to my heart, as is Maliki. And if I found my goddess by looking honestly through my own heart, then so I have found my dearest friend and ally. They are with me, all three. The Gwyn Hirva. Dear Gwyn Wirvar, as well. I am living in a land of stark beauty and stark reality, a place where you have to be wary and alert and at your very best at all times. I call this paradise. Sein Dritz Do Udan. Chapter 1. The Stooge. When the wizard's caravan from the host tower of the Arcane saw the snow-capped peak of Kelvin's cairn rising from the flat horizon, they were more than a little relieved. The hard journey from Luskan to the remote frontier settlement known as 10 Towns had taken them more than 3 10 days. The first 10 day hadn't been too difficult. The troop held close to the Sword Coast, and though they were traveling along the northernmost reaches of the realm, the summer breezes blowing in off the trackless sea were comfortable enough. But when they rounded the westernmost spurs of the spine of the world, the mountain range that many consider the northern boundary of civilization, and turned into Icewind Dale, the wizards quickly understood why they had been advised against making this journey. Icewind Dale, 1,000 square miles of barren, broken tundra, had been described to them as one of the most unwelcoming lands in all of the realms, and within a single day of traveling on the northern side of the spine of the world, Elduluk, Dendibar, the Molted, and the other wizards from Luskan considered the reputation well earned. Bordered by impassable mountains on the south, an expanding glacier on the east, and an unnavigable sea of countless icebergs on the north and west. Icewind Dale was attainable only through the pass between the spine of the world and the coast, a trail rarely used by any but the most hardy of merchants. For the rest of their lives, two memories would ring clear in the wizards' minds whenever they thought about this trip. Two facts of life on Icewind Dale that travelers here never forget. The first was the endless moaning of the wind, as though the land itself was continuously groaning in torment. And the second was the emptiness of the dale, mile after mile of gray and brown horizon lines. The caravan's destination marked the only varying features in all the dale, 10 small towns positioned around the 3 lakes of the region, under the shadow of the only mountain, Galvin's Cairn. Like everyone else who came to this harsh land, the wizards sought 10 towns, scrimshaw, the fine ivory carvings made from the hard bones of the knucklehead trout which swam in the waters of the lakes. Some of the wizards, though, had even more devious gains in mind. Whew. Give me one more stretch. Whew. Ah. The man marveled at how easily the slender dagger slipped through the folds of the older man's robe and then cut deeper into the wrinkled flesh. Mordecai the Red turned on his apprentice, his eyes locked into a widened, amazed set at the betrayal by the man he had raised as his own son for a quarter of a century. Akar Kezel let go of the dagger and backed away from his master. Horrified that the mortally wounded man was still standing, he ran out of distance for his retreat, stumbling into the rear wall of the small cabin the wizards of Luskan had been given as temporary quarters by the host city of Easthaven. Kessel trembled visibly, pondering the grisly consequences he would face in light of the growing possibility that the magical expertise of the old mage had found a way to defeat even death itself. What terrible fate would his mighty mentor impose upon him for his betrayal? What magical torments could a true and powerful wizard such as Mordecai conjure that would outdo the most agonizing of the tortures common throughout the land? The old man held his gaze firmly on Akar Kezel. Even as the last light began to fade from his dying eyes, he didn't ask why. He didn't even outwardly question Kezel about the possible motives. The gain of power was involved somewhere, he knew. That was always the case in such betrayals. What confused him was the instrument, not the motive. Kezel. How could Kezel, the bumbling apprentice, who, stuttering lips, could barely call out the simplest of cantrips, possibly hope to profit from the death of the only man who had ever shown him more than basic polite consideration? Mordecai the Red fell dead. It was one of the few questions he had never found the answer to. Kezel remained against the wall, needing its tangible support, and continued to shake for long minutes. Gradually, the confidence that had put him in this dangerous position began to grow again within him. He was the boss now. Eldeluck, Dendavar, and Mottled, and the other wizards who had made the trip had said so. With his master gone, he, Akar Kezel, would be rightfully awarded his own meditation chamber and alchemy lab in the host tower of the arcane in Luskan. Eldeluck, Dendabar, and mottled, and the others had said so. Give me just one moment. Sorry about that. Just readjusting in the chair. Need some water. Alright, there we go. I love using the ruler and Amazon Kindle. I'm gonna have to remember those. Helps me not lose my place. Alright. It is done, then? The burly man asked when Kezel entered the dark alley designated as the meeting place. Kezel nodded eagerly. The red-robed wizard of Bluskin shan't cast again, he proclaimed, too loudly for the likes of his fellow conspirators. Speak quietly, fool. Dendabar, the mottled, a frail-looking man, tucked defensively within the alleyway's shadows, demanded in the same monotonous voice that he always used. Dendabar rarely spoke at all and never displayed any semblance of passion when he did. Ever was he hidden beneath the low-pulled cowl of his robe. There was something cold-blooded about Dendabar that unnerved most people who met him. Though the wizard was physically the smallest and least imposing man of the merchant caravan that had made the 400-mile journey to the frontier settlement of 10 towns, Kezel feared him more than any of the others. Mordecai the Red, my former master, is dead, Kezel reiterated softly. Akar Kezel, this day forward known as Kezel the Red, is now appointed to the Wizards Guild of Luskin. Easy, friend, said Edaluk, putting a comforting hand on Kezel's nervously twitching shoulder. There will be time for a proper coronation when we return to the city. He smiled and winked at Dendabar. From behind Kezel's head, Kezel's mind was whirling, lost in a daydream search through all of the ramifications of his pending appointment. Never again would he be taunted by the other apprentices, boys much younger than he, who climbed through the ranks in the guild step by tedious step. They would show him some respect now, for he would leap beyond even those who had passed him by the earliest days of his apprenticeship into the honorable position of wizard. As his thoughts probed every detail of the coming days, though, Kezel's radiant face suddenly grayed over. He turned sharply on the man at his side. His features tensed as though he had discovered a terrible error. Eldaluk and several of the others in the alley became uneasy. They all fully understood the consequences if the Archmage of the Host Tower of the Arcane ever learned of their murderous deed. The robe? Kezel asked. Should I have brought the red robe? Edaluk couldn't contain his relieved chuckle, but Kezel merely took it as a comforting gesture from his newfound friend. I should have known that something so trivial would throw him into such a fit, Edaluk told himself. But to Kezel he merely said, have no fear about it. There are plenty of robes in the Host Tower. It would seem a bit suspicious, would it not, if you showed up in the Archmage's doorstep claiming the vacated seat of Mordecai the Red, and holding the very garment that the murdered wizard was wearing when he was slain. Kezel thought about it for a moment, then agreed. Perhaps, Eldeluke continued, you should not wear the red robe. Kezel's eyes squinted in panic. His old self-doubts, which had haunted him for all of his days since his childhood, began to bubble up within him. What was Eldeluke saying? Were they going to change their minds and not award him the seat he had rightfully earned? Eldeluke had used the ambiguity of his statement as a tease, but he didn't want to push Kezel into a dangerous state of doubt. With a second wink at Dendabar, who was inwardly thoroughly enjoying this game, he answered the poor wretch's unspoken question. I only meant that perhaps a different color would better suit you. Blue would complement your eyes. Kezel cackled in relief. Perhaps, he agreed, his fingers nervously twiddling. Dendabar suddenly grew tired of the farce. He motioned for his burly companion to be rid of the annoying little wretch. Eldeluke obediently led Kezel back down the alleyway. Go on now. Back to the stables, he instructed. Tell the master there that the wizards shall be leaving for Luskan this very night. But what of the body? Kezel asked. Eldeluke smiled evilly. Leave it. That cabin is reserved for visiting merchants and dignitaries from the south. It will most probably remain vacant until next spring. Another murder in this part of the world will cause little excitement, I assure you. And even if the good people of East Haven were to decipher what had truly happened, they are wise enough to tend to their own business and leave the affairs of wizards to wizards. The group from Luskan moved out into the waning sunlight on the street. Now be off, Eldeluke commanded. Look for us as the sun sets. He watched as Kezel, like some elated little boy, scurried away. How fortunate to find so convenient a tool, Dendabar noted. The wizard's stupid apprentice saved us much trouble. I doubt that we would have found a way to get at that crafty old one, though the gods alone know why. Ever did Mordecai have a soft spot for this wretched little apprentice? Soft enough for a dagger's point, laughed a second voice. And so convenient a setting, remarked yet another. Unexplained bodies are considered no more than an inconvenience to the cleaning wenches in this uncivilized outpost. The burly Eldeluke laughed aloud. The gruesome task was at least completed. They could, finally, leave this barren stretch of frozen desert and return home. Kezel's step was sprightly as he made his way across the village of East Haven to the barn where the wizard's horses had been stabled. He felt as though becoming a wizard would change every aspect of his daily life, as if some mystical strength had somehow been infused into his previously incompetent talents. He tingled in anticipation of the power that would be his. An alley cat crossed before him, casting him a wary glance as it pranced by. Slit-eyed, Kezel looked around to see if anyone was watching. Why not? He muttered, pointing a deadly finger at the cat. He uttered the command words to call forth a burst of energy. The nervous feline bolted away at the spectacle, but no magical bolt struck it, or even near it. Kezel looked down at his signed fingertip and wondered what he had done wrong. but he wasn't overly dismayed. His own blackened nail was the strongest effect that he'd ever gotten from that particular spell. Damn. Goddamn. Just starting the book off strong with a murder. 2 murders, actually, if you count the prelude. Goddamn's all I have to say. What do you guys think so far? We're only on chapter 1, but you never know. Someone might have an opinion. Anyways. Chapter 2. On the banks of Mare Daldon. Regis the Halfling, the only one of his kind for hundreds of miles in any direction, locked his fingers behind his head and leaned back against the mossy blanket of the tree trunk. Regis was short, even by the standards of his diminutive race, with the fluff of his curly brown locks barely cresting the 3-foot mark. But his belly was amply thickened by his love of a good meal, or several, as the opportunities presented themselves. The crooked stick that served as his fishing pole rose up above him, clenched between 2 of his furry toes, and hung out over the quiet lake, mirrored perfectly in the glassy surface of Mare Daldon. Gentle ripples rolled down the image as the red-painted wooden bobber began to dance slightly. The line had floated in toward shore and hung limply in the water, so Regis couldn't feel the fish nibbling at the bait. In seconds, the hook was cleaned, with no catch to show for it. But the halfling didn't know, and it would be hours before he'd even bothered to check. Not that he'd have cared, anyway. This trip was for leisure, not work. With winter coming on, Regis figured that this might well be his last excursion of the year to the lake. He didn't go in for winter fishing, like some of the fanatically greedy humans of 10 towns. Besides, the halfling already had enough ivory stocked up for other people's catches to keep him busy for all 7 months of snow. He was truly a credit to his less than ambitious race, carving out a bit of civilization in a land where none existed, hundreds of miles from the most remote settlement that could rightly be called a city. Other halflings never came this far north, even during the summer months, preferring the comfort of the southern climes. Regis, too, would have gladly packed up his belongings and returned to the south, except for a little problem he had with a certain guild master of a prominent thieves' guild. A 4-inch block of the white gold lay beside the reclining halfling, along with several delicate carving instruments. The beginnings of a horse's muzzle marred the squareness of the block. Regis had meant to work on the piece while he was fishing. Regis meant to do a lot of things. Too fine a day, he had rationalized, an excuse that never seemed to grow stale for him. This time, though, unlike so many others, it truly bore credibility. It seemed as though the weather demons that bent this harsh land to their iron will had taken a holiday, or perhaps they were just gathering their strength for a brutal winter. The result was an autumn day fitting for the civilized lands to the south. A rare day indeed, for the land that had come to be called Icewind Dale, a name well earned by the eastern breezes that always seemed to blow in, bringing with them the chilled air of Ragged Glacier. Even on the few days that the wind shifted, there was little relief, for 10 Towns was bordered on the north and west by miles of empty tundra, and then more ice, the sea of moving ice. Only southern breezes promised any relief, and any wind that tried to reach this desolate area from the direction was usually blocked by the high peaks of the spine of the world. Regus managed to keep his eyes open for a while, peering up through the fuzzy limbs of the fir trees at the puffy white clouds as they sailed across the sky on the mild breezes. The sun rained down golden warmth, and the halfling was tempted now and then to take off his waistcoat. Whenever a cloud blocked out the warming rays, though, Regus was reminded that it was late on the tundra. In a month there would be snow. Into the roads west and south to Luskan, the nearest city to 10 towns, would be impassable to any but the sturdy or the stupid. Regus looked across the long bay and rolled in around the side of his little fishing hole. The rest of 10 towns was taking advantage of the weather too. The fishing boats were out in force, scrambling and weaving around each other to find their special hitting spots. No matter how many times he witnessed it, the greed of humans always amazed Regus. Back in the southern land of Kalimshen, the halfling had been climbing a fast ladder to associate guildmaster in one of the most prominent thieves' guilds in the port city of Kalimport. But as he saw it, human greed had cut short his career. His guildmaster, the Pasha Pook, possessed a wonderful collection of rubies, a dozen at least, whose facets were so ingeniously cut that they seemed to cast an almost hypnotic spell on anyone who viewed them. Regus had marveled at the scintillating stones whenever Pook put them out on display, and after all, he'd only taken one. To this day, the halfling couldn't figure out why the Pasha, who had no less than 11 others, was still so angry with him. Alas, for the greed of humans, Regus would say whenever the Pasha's men showed up in another town that the halfling had made his home, forcing him to extend his exile to an even more remote land. But he hadn't needed that phrase for a year and a half now since he had arrived in 10 towns. Pook's arms were long, but his frontier settlement in the middle of the most inhospitable and untamed land imaginable was a longer way still, and Regus was quite content in the security of his new sanctuary. There was wealth here, and for those nimble and talented enough to be a scrimshander, someone who could transform the ivory-like bone of a knucklehead trout into an artistic carving, a comfortable living could be made with a minimum amount of work. And with 10 Towers Scrimshaw fast becoming the rave of the South, the halfling meant to shake off his customary lethargy and turn his newfound trade into a booming business. Someday. Ah. All right. Dritz Dowerden trotted along silently, his soft, low-cut boots barely stirring the dust. He kept the cowl of his brown cloak pulled low over the flowing waves of his stark white hair, and moved with such effortless grace that an onlooker might have thought him to be no more than an illusion, an optical trick of the brown sea of tundra. The dark elf pulled his cloak tighter about him. He felt as vulnerable in the sunlight as a human would in the dark of night. More than half a century of living many miles below ground had not been erased by several years on the sunlit surface. To this day, sunlight drained and dizzied him. But Dritz had traveled right through the night and was compelled to continue. Already he was overdue for his meeting with Brunor in the Dwarf's Alley, and he had seen the signs. The reindeer had begun their autumn migration southeast to the sea, yet no human track followed the herd. The cave north of 10 towns, always a stopover for the nomadic barbarians on their way back to the tundra, had not even been stocked to re-provision the tribes on their long trek. Dritz understood the implications. In normal barbarian life, the survival of the tribes depended on their following the reindeer herd. The apparent abandonment of their traditional ways was more than a little disturbing. And Dritz had heard the battle drums. Their subtle rumblings rolled over the empty plain like distant thunder in patterns, usually recognizable only to the other barbarian tribes. But Dritz knew what they foretold. He was an observer who understood the value of knowledge, a friend or foe, and he had often used his stealth prowess to observe the daily routines and traditions of the proud natives of Icewind Dale, the barbarians. Dritz picked up his pace, pushing himself to the limits of his endurance. In 5 short years, he had come to care for the cluster of villages known as 10 Towns, and for the people who lived there. Like so many of the other outcasts who had finally settled there, the drow had found no welcome anywhere else in the realms. Even here, he was only tolerated by most, but in the unspoken kinship of fellow rogues, few people bothered him. He'd been luckier than most. He'd found a few friends who could look beyond his heritage and see his true character. Anxiously, the dark elf squinted at Kelvin's cairn, the solitary mountain that marked the entrance to the rocky Dwarven Valley between Mare Dalden and Lac Denonshire. But his violet-colored almond eyes, marvelous orbs that could rival an owl's in the night, could not penetrate the blur of daylight enough to gauge the distance. Again, he ducked his head under the cowl, preferring a blind run to the dizziness of prolonged exposure to the sun, and sank back into the dark dreams of Menzoberranzan, the lightless underworld city of his ancestors. The drow elves had actually once walked on the surface world, dancing beneath the sun and the stars with their fair-skinned cousins. Yet the dark elves were malicious, passionless killers beyond the tolerance of even their normally unjudging kin. And in the inevitable war of the elven nations, the drow were driven into the bowels of the ground. Here they found a world of dark secrets and dark magics, and were content to remain. Over the centuries, they had flourished and grown strong once more, attuning themselves to the ways of mysterious magics. They became more powerful than even their surface-dwelling cousins, whose dealings with the arcane arts under the life-giving warmth of the sun were hobby, not necessity. As a race, though, the drow had lost all desire to see the sun and the stars. Both their bodies and minds had adapted to the depths, and luckily for all who dwelt under the open sky, the evil dark elves were content to remain where they were, only occasionally resurfacing to raid and pillage. As far as Dritz knew, he was the only one of his kind living on the surface. He had learned some tolerance of the light, but he still suffered the hereditary weakness it imparted upon his kind. Yet, even considering his disadvantage under daytime conditions, Dritz was outraged by his own carelessness when the two bear-like tundra yetis, their camouflaging coats of shaggy fur still colored in summer brown, suddenly rose up before him. Hoshi, are you destroying something? Give me a moment, guys. I'll be right back. Hoshi's destroying something he's not supposed to. Or sit under my desk. That works too. Oh, I have returned. Sorry about that. Hoshi's being a butthead. You know, I think I like the peacefulness of this. Give me just one moment. I am actually going to... There we go. No, we'll keep Roger there. Roger's a good egg. Yes, Hoshi, you can chew on that box. That's fine. Oh, Hoshi. I need to get new glasses. Shall we continue? Actually, one more second. I just realized I didn't put my phone on silent. Alright. There we go. Now that my phone's on silent, we shouldn't be dealing with any interruptions. I've got the alerts and sounds off, so we should be good to go. Nothing chaotic should happen. In fact, while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to turn off tits. There we go. Alright, now that I'm done procrastinating, well, anyways. A red flag rose from the deck of one of the fishing boats, signaling a catch. Rigus watched as it moved higher and higher. A 4-footer, or better, the halfling mumbled approvingly when the flag topped out just below the mast crosspiece. There'll be singing in one house tonight. A second ship raced up beside the one that had signaled the catch, banging into the anchored vessel in its rush. The two crews immediately drew weapons and faced off, though each remained on its respective ship with nothing between him and the boats but empty water. Rigus clearly heard the shouts of the captains. "Ere you stole my catch," the captain of the second ship soared. "You're water weary," the captain of the first ship retorted. "Never it was. It's our fish fairly hooked and fairly hauled. Now be gone with your stinking tub before we take you out of the water." Predictably, the crew of the second ship was over the rail and swinging before the captain of the first ship had finished speaking. Okay, as long as he doesn't chew any cords, he'll be fine. Oh, Hoshi. God, what the hell is going on with my eyes today? I need to clean my glasses real quick. Maybe that'll help. The rats are on the wheel. Hoshi's destroying a box. There is no peace. Alright, well, while the children create chaos, I shall clean my glasses real quick. See if maybe cleaning these glasses will help me with reading. Might have to do a larger font, push come to shove. Not the end of the world. Alright, that should be better, just until I can get new glasses. Let me see, I might have to do a larger font. Well, I'm glad I can make the font bigger. That's nice. Alright. I'll be ready to continue. Rigus turned his eyes back to the clouds. The dispute on the boats did not hold any interest for him, though the noises of the battle were certainly disturbing. Such squabbles were common on the lakes, always over the fish, especially if someone landed a big one. Generally, they weren't too serious. More bluster and parrying than actual fighting, and only rarely did someone get badly wounded or killed. There were exceptions, though. In one skirmish involving no less than 17 boats, 3 full crews, and half of a fourth were cut down and left floating in the bloodied water. On the same day, that particular lake, the southernmost of the 3, had its name changed from Loon to Red Waters. Ah, little fishes, what trouble you bring, Rigus muttered softly, pondering the irony of the havoc the silvery fish wreaked on the lives of the greedy people of 10 towns. These 10 communities owed their very existence to the knucklehead trout, with their oversized fist-shaped heads and the bones the consistency of fine ivory. The 3 lakes were the only spots in the world where the valuable fish were known to swim, and though the region was barren and wild, overrun with humanoids and barbarians, and sporting frequent storms that could flatten the sturdiest of buildings, the lure of quick wealth brought in people from the farthest reaches of the realms. As many inevitably left as came in, though. Icewind Dale was a bleak, colorless wasteland of merciless weather and countless dangers. Death was a common visitor to the villagers, stalking any who could not face the harsh realities of Icewind Dale. Still, the towns had grown considerably in the century that had passed since the knuckleheads were first discovered. Initially, the 9 villages on the lakes were no more than the shanties where individual frontiersmen had staked out to claim on a particularly good fishing hole. The 10th village, Bryn Shander, though now a walled, bustling settlement of several thousand people, had been merely an empty hill sporting a solitary cabin where the fishermen would meet once a year, exchanging stories and goods with the traders from Luskan. Back in the early days of 10 towns, a boat, even a one-man rowboat, out on the lakes, whose waters year-round were cold enough to kill in minutes anyone unfortunate enough to fall overboard, was a rare sight. But now every town on the lakes had a fleet of sailing vessels, flying its flag. Targos alone, largest of the fishing towns, could put over 100 vessels onto Mardalden. Some of them 2-masted schooners with crews of 10 or more. A death cry sounded from the embattled ships, and the clang of steel on steel rang out loudly. Regis wondered, and not for the first time, if the people of 10 towns would be better off without the troublesome fish. The halfling had to admit that 10 towns had been a haven for him, though. His practiced nimble fingers adapted easily to the instruments of the scrimshander, and he had even been elected as the council spokesman of one of the villages. Granted, Lonely Wood was the smallest of the northernmost of the 10 towns, a place where the rogues of rogues hid out, but Regis still considered his appointment an honor. It was convenient as well, as the only true scrimshander in... Excuse you, imp? No, off the desk. No, down. What are you doing? Get down. He's just looking at me. Imp, down. Come on, get down. You're being rude. Down. Don't be getting up on the desk. You know better. He knows better, but he doesn't care. Oh. Where was I? Yes. I'm going to go back a little bit, though. I'll go back to the top of the paragraph since we were rudely interrupted by Imp. Alright. Here we go. The halfling had to admit that 10 towns had been a haven for him, though. His practiced nimble fingers adapted easily to the instruments of the scrimshander, and he had even been elected as the council spokesman of one of the villages. Granted, Lonely Wood was the smallest of the northernmost of the 10 towns, a place where the rogues of rogues hid out. But Regis still considered his appointment an honor. It was convenient as well. As the only true scrimshander in Lonelywood, Regis was the sole person in the town with reason to desire to travel regularly to Bryn Shander, the principal settlement and market hub of 10 towns. This had proved to be quite a boon to the halfling. He became the primary courier to bring the catches of Lonelywood's fishermen to market, for a commission equaling a 10th piece of the goods. This alone kept him deep enough in ivory to make an easy living. Once a month during the summer season, and once every 3 in the winter, weather permitting, Regis had to attend council meetings and fulfill his duties as spokesman. These meetings took place in Bryn Shander, and though they normally broke down into nothing more than petty arguments over fishing territories between villages, they usually lasted only a few hours. Regis considered his attendance a small price to pay for keeping his monopoly on trips to the southern marketplace. The fighting on the boats soon ended, only one man dead, and Regis drifted back into quiet enjoyment of the sailing clouds. The halfling looked back over his shoulder at the dozens of low wooden cabins dotting the thick rows of trees that comprised Lonelywood. Despite the reputation of its inhabitants, Regis found this town to be the best in the region. The trees provided a measure of protection from the howling wind and good corner posts for the houses. Only its distance from Bryn Shander had kept the town in the wood from being a more prominent member of 10 towns. Abruptly, Regis pulled the ruby pendant out from under his waistcoat and stared at the wondrous gem he had appropriated from his former master, 1,000 miles and more to the south, in Kalambor. Ah, Pook, he mused. If only you could see me now. The elf went for the 2 scimitars sheathed on his hips. But the yetis closed quickly. Instinctively, Dritz spun to his left, sacrificing his opposite flank to accept the rush of the closest monster. His right arm became helplessly pinned to his side as the yeti wrapped its great arms around him, but he managed to keep his left arm free enough to draw his second weapon. Ignoring the pain of the yeti's squeeze, Dritz set the hilt of the scimitar firmly against his hip and allowed the momentum of the second charging monster to impale it on the curving blade. In its frenzied death throes, the second yeti pulled away, taking the scimitar with it. The remaining monster bore Dritz to the ground under its weight. The drow worked his free hand frantically to keep the deadly teeth from gaining a hold of his throat. But he knew that it was only a matter of time before his stronger foe finished him. Suddenly, Dritz heard a sharp crack. The yeti shuddered violently. Its head contorted weirdly, and a gout of blood and brains poured over its face from above its forehead. "You're late, elf," came the rough edge of a familiar voice. Brynor Battlehammer walked up the back of his dead foe, disregarding the fact that the heavy monster lay on top of his elfin friend. In spite of the added discomfort, the dwarf's long, pointed, often broken nose and gray streaked through still fiery red beard came as a welcome to Dritz. "Knew I'd find ye in trouble if I came out and looked for ye." Smiling in relief, and also at the mannerisms of the ever-amazing dwarf, Dritz managed to wriggle out from under the monster, while Brynor worked to free his axe from the thick skull. "Head's as hard as frozen oak," grumbled the dwarf. He planted his feet behind the yeti's ears and pulled the axe free with a mighty jerk. "Where's that kitten of yours, anyway?" Dritz fumbled around in his pack for a moment and produced a small onyx statue of a panther. "I'd hardly label Gwenvar a kitten," he said with a fond reverence. He turned the figurine over in his hands, feeling the intricate details of the work to ensure that it had not been damaged in the fall under the yeti. "Bah, a cat's a cat," insisted the dwarf. "And why isn't it here when you needed it. Even a magical animal needs its rest, Dritz explained. Bah, Brenor spouted again. It's sure to be a sorry day when a drow and a ranger, what's more, gets taken off his guard on an open plain by two scab-tundra yetis. Brenor licked his stained axe blade and spat in disgust. Foul beasts, he grumbled. Can't even eat the damn things. He pounded the axe into the ground to clean the blade and stomped off toward Kelvin's cairn. Dritz put Guinevere back into the pack and went to retrieve his scimitar from the other monster. Come on, elf, scolded the dwarf. With 5 miles and more of road to go. Dritz shook his head and wiped the blood-stained blade on the felled monster's fur. Roll on, Brenor Battlehammer, he whispered under his smile. And know to your pleasure that every monster along our trail will mark well your passing and keep its head safely hidden. Chapter 3. The Mead Hall. One moment. Just need a breather. Okay. Many miles north of 10 towns across the trackless tundra to the northernmost edge of the land in all the realms, the frosts of winter had already hardened the ground in a white-tipped glaze. There were no mountains or trees to block the cold bite of the relentless eastern wind, carrying the frost air from Ragged Glacier. The great bergs of the sea of moving ice drifted slowly past, the wind howling off their high-riding tips, and a grim reminder of the coming season. And yet, the nomadic tribes who summered there with the reindeer had not journeyed with the herd's migration southwest along the coast of the more hospitable sea on the south side of the peninsula. The unwavering flatness of the horizon was broken in one small corner by the solitary encampment, the largest gathering of barbarians this far north in more than a century. To accommodate the leaders of the respective tribes, several deerskin tents had been laid out in a circular pattern, each encompassed in its own ring of campfires. In the center of this circle, a huge deerskin hall had been constructed, designed to hold every warrior of the tribes. The tribesmen called it Hengoro, the Mead Hall. And to the northern barbarians, this was a place of reverence, where food and drink were shared in toasts to Tempest, the god of battle. The fires outside the hall burned low this night, for King Hefstag and the tribe of the Elk, the last to arrive, were expected in the camp before moonset. All the barbarians already in the encampment I just did something. Can I undo that? That is not what I wanted to do. Okay, I guess that's highlighted now. Oops. Did not mean to do that, but okay. We'll just go back a little bit to just reread a little bit. Oops. Okay. The fires outside the hall burned low this night, for King Halfstag of the tribe of the Elk, the last to arrive, were expected in the camp before moonset. All the barbarians already in encampment had assembled in Hengara and began the pre-council festivities. Great flagons of mead dotted every table, and good-natured contests of strength sprang up with growing frequency. Though the tribes often warred with each other in Hengarot, all differences were put aside. King Borg, a robust man with tousled blonde locks, a beard fading to white, and lines of experience etched deeply into his tanned face, stood solemnly at the head table. Representing his people, he stood tall and straight, his wide shoulders proudly squared. The barbarians of Icewind Dale stood all full head and more above the average inhabitant of 10 towns, sprouting as though to take advantage of the wide and roomy expanses of empty tundra. They were indeed much akin to their land. Like the ground they roamed over, their often bearded faces were browned from the sun and cracked by the constant wind, giving them a leathery, toughened appearance, a foreboding, expressionless mask that did not welcome outsiders. They despised the people of 10 towns, whom they considered weak wealth chasers possessed of no spiritual value whatsoever. Yet one of those wealth chasers stood among them now, in their most revered hall of meeting. At Borg's side was de Bernsen, the dark-haired southerner, the only man in the room who was not born and bred of the barbarian tribes. The mousy de Bernezen kept his shoulders defensively haunched as he glanced nervously about the hall. He was well aware that the barbarians were not overly fond of outsiders, and that any one of them, even the youngest attendant, could break him in half with a casual flick of his huge hands. "Hold steady," Borg instructed the southerner. "Tonight you hoist mead flagons with the tribe of the wolf, if they sense your fear." He left the rest unspoken, but de Brenzen knew well how the barbarians dealt with weakness. The small man took a steadying deep breath and straightened his shoulders. Yet Borg, too, was nervous. King Halfstag was his primary rival on the tundra, commanding a force as dedicated, disciplined, and numerous as his own. Unlike the customary barbarian raids, Borg's plan called for the total conquest of 10 towns, enslaving the surviving fishermen and living well off the wealth they harvested from the lakes. Borg saw an opportunity for his people to abandon their precarious nomadic existence and find a measure of luxury they had never known. Everything now hinged on the ascent of Halfstag, a brutal king interested only in personal glory and triumphant plunder. Even if the victory over 10 towns was achieved, Borg knew that he would eventually have to deal with his rival, who would not easily abandon the fervent bloodlust that had put him in power. That was a bridge the king of the tribe of the wolf would have to cross later. The primary issue now was the initial conquest, and if Halfstag refused to go along, the lesser tribes would split in their alliances among the two. War might be joined as early as the next morning. This would prove devastating to all their people, for even the barbarians who survived the initial battles would be in for a brutal struggle against winter. The reindeer had long since departed for the southern pastures, and the caves along the route had not been stocked in preparation. Halfstag was a cunning leader. He knew that at this late date the tribes were committed to following the initial plan, but Borg wondered what terms his rival would impose. Borg took comfort in the fact that no major conflicts had broken out among the assembled tribes. And this night, when they all met in the common hall, the atmosphere was brotherly and jovial, with every beard and hengurut lathered in foam. Borg's gamble had been that the tribes could be united by a common enemy and the promise of continued prosperity. All had gone well, so far. But the brute, Heafstag, remained the key to it all. The heavy boots of Heafstag's column shook the ground beneath their determined march. The huge, one-eyed king himself led the procession, his great swinging strides indicative of the nomads of the tundra, intrigued by Borg's proposal and wary of winter's early onset. The rugged king had chosen to march straight through the cold nights, stopping only for short periods of food and rest, though primarily known for his ferocious proficiency in battle. Heafstag was a leader who carefully weighed his every move. The impressive march would add to the initial respect given his people by the warriors of the other tribes, and Heafstag was quick to pounce on any advantage he could get. Not that he expected any trouble at Hengurut. He held Borg in high respect. Twice before he had met the king of the tribe of the wolf on the field of honor, with no victory to show for it. If Borg's plan was as promising as it initially seemed, Heafstag would go along, insisting only on an equal share of the leadership with the Blonde King. He didn't care for the notion of the tribesmen, once they had conquered the towns, could end their nomadic lifestyle and be contented with a new life trading knucklehead trout. But he was willing to allow Borg his fantasies if they delivered to him the thrill of battle and easy victory. Let the plunder be taken and warmth secured for the long winter before he changed the original agreement and redistributed the booty. When the lights of the campfires came into view, the column quickened its pace. "Sing, my proud warriors," Heafstag commanded. "Sing hearty and strong. Let those gathered tremble at the approach of the tribe of the elk." Borg had an ear cocked for the sound of Heafstag's arrival. Knowing well the tactics of his rival, he was not surprised in the least the first notes of the Song of Tempos rolled in from the night. The Blonde King reacted at once, leaping onto a table and calling scions to gather. "Hearken, men of the north," he cried. "Behold the challenge of the song." Hengura immediately burst into commotion as the men dashed from their seats and scrambled to join the assembling groups of their respective tribes. Every voice was lifted in the common refrain of the god of battle, singing of deeds of valor and of glorious deaths on the field of honor. This verse was taught to every barbarian boy from the time he could speak his first words. For the Song of Tempos was actually considered a measure of a tribe's strength. The only variance in the words from tribe to tribe was the refrain that identified the singers. Here the warriors sang at crescendo pitch, for the challenge of the song was to determine whose call to the god of battle was most clearly heard by Tempos. Heafstag led his men right up to the entrance of Hengurut. inside the hall calls the tribe of the wolf were obviously drowning out the others, but Heafstag's warriors matched the strength of Borg's men. One by one, the lesser tribes fell silent under the dominance of the wolf and the elk. The challenge dragged on between the two remaining tribes for many more minutes, neither willing to relinquish superiority in the eyes of their deity. Inside the mead hall, men of the beaten tribes nervously put their hands to their weapons. More than one war had erupted on the plains because the challenge of the song could determine no clear winner. Finally, the flap of the tent opened, admitting Heafstag's standard bearer, a youth. Tall and proud, with observing eyes, and carefully weighed everything about him and belied his age. He put a whalebone horn to his lips and blew a clear note. Simultaneously, according to tradition, both tribes stopped their singing. The standard bearer walked across the room toward the host king, and his eyes never blinking or turning away from Borg's imposing visage. Though Borg could see that the youth marked the expressions that were upon him, Heafstag had chosen his herald well, Borg thought. "Good King Borg," the standard bearer began with a commotion when all commotion had ceased, and other assembled kings, the tribe of the elk, asked leave to enter the hengrot and share mead with you, that we might join together in toast to Tempos. Borg studied the herald a bit longer, testing to see if he could shake the youth's composure with an unexpected delay. But the herald did not blink or turn aside his penetrating stare, and the set of his jaw remained firm and confident. "Granted," answered Borg, impressed, "and well met." Then he mumbled under his breath, "A pity that Heafstag is not possessed of your patience." "I announce Heafstag, king of the tribe of the elk," the herald cried out in a clear voice, "son of Hrothulf the strong, son of Angar the brave, thrice killer of the great bear, twice conqueror of the Tourmaline to the south, who slew Dawning, king of the tribe of the bear, in single combat, in a single stroke." This drawing uneasy shuffles from the tribe of the bear, and especially their king, Halfding, son of Donan. The herald went on for many minutes, listing every deed, every honor, every title accumulated by Heafstag during his long and illustrious career. As the challenge of the song was competition between the tribes, the listing of titles and feats was a personal competition between men, especially kings, whose valor and strength reflected directly upon their warriors. Borg had dreaded this moment, for his rival's list exceeded ever his own. He knew that one of the reasons Heafstag had arrived last was so that his list could be presented to all in attendance, men who had heard Borg's own herald in private audience upon their arrival days before. It was the advantage of a host king to have his list read to every tribe in attendance, while the heralds of visiting kings would only speak to the tribes present upon their immediate arrival. By coming in last, and at the time when all the other tribes would be assembled together, Heafstag had erased that advantage. At length, the standard bearer finished and returned across the hall to open the tent flap for his king. Heafstag strode confidently across the hengrot to face Borg. If men were impressed with Heafstag's list of valor, they were certainly not disappointed by his appearance. The red-bearded king was nearly 7 feet tall, with a barrel-shaped girth that dwarfed even Borg's, and Heavstag wore his battle scars proudly. One of his eyes had been torn out by the antlers of a reindeer, and his left hand was hopelessly crumpled from a fight with a polar bear. The king of the tribe of the elk had seen more battles than any man on the tundra, and by all appearances he was ready and anxious to fight in many more. The two kings eyed each other sternly, neither blinking or diverting his glance for even a moment. "The wolf or the elk?" Heavstag asked at length, the proper question after an undecided challenge of the song. Borg was careful to give the appropriate response. "Well met and well fought," he said. "Let the king ears of tempos alone decide, though the god himself will be hard-pressed to make such a choice." With the formalities properly carried out, the tension eased from Heavstag's face. He smiled broadly at his rival. "Well met, Borg, king of the tribe of the wolf. It does me well to face you and not see my own blood staining the tip of your deadly spear." Heavstag's friendly words caught Borg by surprise. He couldn't have hoped for a better start to the war council. He returned the compliment with an equal fervor, nor to duck the sure cut of your cruel axe. The smile abruptly left Heavstag's face when he took notice at the dark-haired man in Borg's side. What right, by valor or by blood, does this weakling southerner have in the mead hall of Tempos? The red-bearded king demanded. "His place is with his own, or with the woman at best, or with the women at best." "Hold to faith, Heavstag," Borg explained. "This is Debernizan, a man of great import to our victory. Valuable is the information he has brought to me, for he has dwelt in the 10 towns for 2 winters and more." "Then what role does he play?" Heavstag pressed. "He has informed," Borg reiterated. "That is past," said Heavstag. "What value is he to us now? Certainly he cannot fight beside warriors such as ours." Borg cast a glance at Debernizan, biting back his own contempt for the dog who had betrayed his people in a pitiful attempt to fill his own pockets. "Plead your case, southerner, and may Tempos find a place in his field for your bones." Debernizan tried futilely to match the iron gaze of Heavstag. He cleared his throat and spoke as loudly and confidently as he could. "When the towns are conquered and their wealth secured, you shall need one who knows the southern marketplace. I am that man." "At what price?" growled Heavstag. "A comfortable living," answered Debernizan. "A respected position, nothing more." "Bah!" snorted Heavstag. "He would betray his own. He would betray us." The giant king tore the axe from his belt and lurched at Debernizan. Borg grimaced, knowing that this critical moment could defeat the entire plan. With his mangled hand, Heavstag grabbed Debernizan's oily black hair and pulled the smaller man's head to the side, exposing the flesh of his neck. He swung his axe mightily at the target. His gaze locked onto the southerner's face. But even against the unbending rules of tradition, Borg had rehearsed Debernizan well for this moment. The little man had been warned in no uncertain terms that if he struggled at all, he would die in any case. But if he accepted the stroke of Heavstag was merely testing him, but if he accepted the stroke that Heavstag was merely testing him, his life would probably be spared. Mustering all of his willpower, Debernizan steeled his gaze on Heavstag and did not flinch at the approach of death. At the very last moment, Heavstag diverted the axe. its blade whistling within the hairs breathed up of the southerner's throat. Heafstag released the man from his grasp, but he continued to hold him in the intense lock of his single eye. An honest man accepts all judgments of his chosen kings, de Bernizin declared, trying to keep his voice as steady as possible. A cheer erupted from every mouth in Hangarat, and when it died away, Heafstag turned to face Borg. "Who shall lead?" the giant asked bluntly. "Who won the challenge of the song?" Borg answered. "Well settled, good king." Heafstag saluted his rival. "Together, then. You and I let no man dispute our rule." Borg nodded. "Death to any who dare." De Bernizin sighed in a deep relief and shifted his legs defensively. If Heafstag, or even Borg, even noticed the puddle between his feet, his life would certainly be forfeit. He shifted his legs again nervously and glanced around, horrified when he met the gaze of the young standard-bearer. De Bernizin's face blanched white in anticipation of his coming humiliation and death. The standard-bearer unexpectedly turned away and smiled in amusement, but in an unprecedented, merciful act for his rough people, he said nothing. Heafstag threw his arms above his head and raised his gaze and axed to the ceiling. Borg grabbed his axe from his belt and quickly mimicked the movement. "Tempus!" they shouted in unison. Then, eyeing each other once more, they gashed their shield arms with their axes, wetting the blades with their own blood. In a synchronous movement, they spun and heaved the weapons across the hull, each axe finding its mark in the same keg of mead. Immediately, the closest men grabbed flagons and scrambled to catch the first drops spilling of mead that had been blessed with the blood of their kings. "I have drawn a plan for your approval," Borg told Heafstag. "Later, noble friend," the one-eyed king replied. Let tonight be a time of song and drink to celebrate our coming victory." He clapped Borg on the shoulder and winked with his one eye. "Be glad of my arrival, for you were sorely unprepared for such a gathering," he said with a hearty laugh. Borg eyed him curiously, but Heafstag gave him a second grotesque wink to quench his suspicions. Abruptly, the lusty giant snapped his fingers at one of his field lieutenants, nudging his rival with his elbow as if to let him in on the joke. "Fetch the wenches," he commanded. I'm gonna get some water real quick. Give me one moment. Curious about something real quick. Oh, cool. That's how I do it. Okay. Okay. Let me just double check something. Yeah, okay. So I think what we'll do is we will read part 1 today, part 2 next week, and then part 3 on the 8th. We'll split it up into the 3 parts. I think that'll be the best way to go. Or we'll just read as much as we want, as much as we can in the next couple of hours. Either one works. I'm thinking what we'll do is we'll do the reading first, and then I can edit some content, but I'm not sure yet. Anyways, let's continue, shall we? Chapter 4. The Crystal Shard. There was only blackness. Mercifully, he couldn't remember what had happened. Where he was, only blackness, comforting blackness. Then a chilling burn began to grow on his cheeks, robbing him of the tranquility of unconsciousness. Gradually, he was compelled to open his eyes, but even when he squinted, the blinding glare was too intense. He was face down in the snow. Mountains towered all about him, their jagged peaks and deep snow caps reminding him of his location. They had dropped him in the spine of the world. They had left him to die. Akar Kezel's head throbbed when he finally managed to lift it. The sun was shining brightly, but the brutal cold and swirling winds dispelled any warmth the bright rays could impart. Ever was it winter in these high places, and Kezel wore only flimsy robes to protect him from the cold's killing bite. They had left him to die. He stumbled to his feet, knee-deep in white powder, and looked around, far below, down a deep gorge, and moving northward, back toward the tundra and the trails that would take them around the foreboding range of impassable mountains. Kezel saw the black specks that marked the wizard's caravan beginning its long journey back to Luskan. They had deceived him. He understood now that he had been no more than a pawn in their devious designs to rid themselves of Morkai the Red. Edalak, Dendavar, the Mottled, and the others. They never had any intentions of granting him the title of wizard. How could I have been so stupid? Kezel groaned. Images of Morkai, the only man who had ever granted him any measure of respect, flashed across his mind in a guilt-driven haze. He remembered all the joys that the wizard had allowed him to experience. Morkai had once turned him into a bird so that he could feel the freedom of flight, and once a fish to let him experience the blurry world of the undersea. And he had repaid the wonderful man with a dagger. Far down the trails, the departing wizards heard Kessel's anguished scream echoing off the mountain walls. Eldaluk smiled, satisfied that their plan had been executed perfectly, and spurred his horse on. Kezel trudged through the snow. He didn't know why he was walking. He had nowhere to go. Kezel had no escape. Eldaluk had dropped him in a bowl-shaped, snow-filled depression, and with his fingers numbed beyond feeling, he had no chance of climbing out. He tried again to conjure a wizard's fire. He held his outstretched palm skyward, and through chattering teeth uttered the words of power. Nothing. Not even a wisp of smoke. So he started moving again. His legs ached. He almost believed that several of his toes had already fallen away from his left foot. But he didn't dare remove his boot to verify a morbid suspicion. He began to circumnavigate the bowl again, following the same trail he had left behind on his first pass. Abruptly, he found himself veering toward the middle. He didn't know why, and in his delirium, he didn't pause to try and figure it out. All the world had become a white blur, a frozen white blur. Kezel felt himself falling. He felt the icy bite of the snow on his face again. He felt the tingling that signaled the end of the life of his lower extremities. Then he felt warmth. Imperceptible at first, but growing steadily stronger, something was beckoning to him. It was beneath him, buried under the snow. Yet even though the frozen barrier, Kezel felt the life-giving glow of its warmth. He dug, visually guiding hands that could not feel their work. He dug for his life, and then he came upon something solid and felt the heat intensify. Scrambling to push the remaining snow away from it, he managed at last to pull it free. He couldn't understand what he was seeing. He blamed it on delirium. In his frozen hands, Al Kesler held what appeared to be a square-sided icicle. Yet its warmth flowed through him, and he felt the tingles again, this time signaling the rebirth of his extremities. Kesel had no idea what was happening, and he didn't care in the least. For now, he had found hope for life, and that was enough. He hugged the crystal shard to his chest and moved back toward the rocky wall of the dell, searching out the most sheltered area he could find. Under a small overhang, huddled in a small area where the heat of the crystal had pushed the snow away, Akar Kezel survived the first night in the spine of the world. His bedfellow was the crystal shard, Kren Shiniban, an ancient sentient relic that had waited throughout ages, uncounted, for one such as he to appear in the bowl. Awakened again, it was even now pondering the methods it would use to control the weak-willed Kezel. It was a relic enchanted in the earliest days of the world, a perversion that had been lost for centuries, to the dismay of those evil lords who sought its strength. Kren Shiniban was an enigma, a force of the darkness, evil, that drew its strength from the light of day. It was an instrument of destruction, a tool for scrying, a shelter and home for those who would wield it. But foremost among the powers of Kren Shiniban was the strength it imparted to its possessor. Akar Kezel slept comfortably, unaware of what had befallen him. He knew only, and cared only, that his life was not yet at an end. He would learn the implications soon enough. He would come to understand that he would never again play the role of stooge to pretentious dogs like Eldalok, Dendabar, the Molted, and the others. He would become the Akar Kezel of his own fantasies, and all would bow before him. Respect, he mumbled from within the depths of his dream. A dream that Kren Shiniban was imposing upon him. Akar Kezel, the tyrant of Icewind Dale. Kezel awakened to a dawn that he had thought he would never see. The crystal shard had preserved him through the night, yet it had done much more than simply prevent him from freezing. Kezel felt strangely changed that morning. The night before, he had been concerned only with the quantity of his life, wondering how long he could merely survive. But now he pondered the quality of his life. Survival was no longer a question. He felt strength flowing within him. A white deer bounded along the rim of the bowl. Venison, Kezel whispered aloud. He pointed a finger in the direction of his prey and spoke the command words of a spell. Tingling with excitement as he felt the power surge through his blood, a searing white bolt shot out from his hand, felling the heart where it stood. Venison, he declared, mentally lifting the animal through the air toward him without a second thought to the act. Though telekinesis was a spell that hadn't even been in the considerable repertoire of Morkai the Red, Kezel's sole teacher. Though the shard would not have let him. Kezel the Greedy did not stop to ponder the sudden appearance of abilities he'd felt long overdue him. Now that he had food and warmth from the shard, yet a wizard should have a castle, he reasoned, a place where he might practice his darkest secrets undisturbed. He looked to the shard for an answer to his dilemma, and found a duplicate crystal laying next to the first instinctively. So he presumed, though in reality it was another subconscious suggestion from Crenshiniban that guided him. Kezel understood his role in fulfilling his own request. He knew the original shard at once from the warmth and strength that it exuded, but this second one intrigued him as well, holding an impressive aura of power of its own. He took up the copy of the shard and carried it to the center of the bowl, setting it down on the deep snow. Ibsam dal abder, he mumbled without knowing why or even what it meant. Kezel backed away as he felt the force within the image of the relic begin to expand. It caught the rays of the sun and drew them within its depths. The area surrounding the bowl fell into shadow, and it stole the very light of day. It began to pulse with an inner rhythmic light, and then it began to grow. It widened at the base, nearly filling the bowl, and for a while, Kezel feared that he would be crushed against the rocky walls. And in accordance with the crystal's widening, its tip rose up into the morning sky, keeping the dimensions aligned with its power source. Then it was complete. Still an exact image of Crenshiniban, but now of mammoth proportions. A crystalline tower. Somehow, the same way Kezel knew anything about the crystal shard. He knew its name. Krishal Tirith. Alrighty, so what are you guys thinking so far? It's definitely something, that's for sure. You guys enjoying the rats in the background? Oh, those rats. I love them. Alright. Kezel would have been contented, for the time being, at least, to remain in Krishal Tirith and feast off the unfortunate animals that wandered by. He had come from a meager background of unambitious peasants, and though he outwardly boasted of aspirations beyond his station, he was intimidated by the implications of power. He didn't understand how or why those who had gained prominence had risen above the common rabble, and even lied to himself, passing off the accomplishments of others, and conversely, the lack of his own, as a random choice of fate. Now that he had power within his grasp, he had no notion of what to do with it. But Crenshiniban had waited too long to see its return to life wasted as a hunting lodge for a puny human. Kessel's wishy-washiness was actually a favorable attribute from the relic's perspective. Over a period of time, it could persuade Kessel to follow almost any course of action with its nightmare messages. And Crenshiniban had the time. The relic was anxious to, again, taste the thrill of conquest, but a few years did not seem long to an artifact that had been created at the dawn of the world. It would mold the bumbling Kessel into a proper representative of its power, nurture the weak man into an iron-fisted glove, and to deliver its message of destruction. It had done likewise 100 times in the initial struggles of the world, creating and nurturing some of the most formidable and cruel opponents of law across any of the planes. It could do so again. That very night, Kessel, sleeping in the comfortably adorned second level of Crystal Tirith, had dreams of conquest. Not violent campaigns waged against a city such as Luskan, or even on the scale of battle against a frontier settlement, like the villages of 10 towns, but a less ambitious and more realistic start to his kingdom. He dreamed that he had forced a tribe of goblins into servitude, using them to assume the roles as his personal staff, catering to his every need. When he awakened the next morning, he remembered the dream and found that he liked the idea. Later that morning, Kessel explored the 3rd level of the tower, a room like all the others, made of smooth yet stone-strong crystal, this particular one filled with various scrying devices. Suddenly an urge came over him to make a certain gesture and speak an arcane word of command that he assumed he must have heard in the presence of Mordecai. He complied with the feeling and watched in amazement as the dimension within the depths of one of the mirrors in the room suddenly swirled in a gray fog. When the fog cleared, an image came into focus. Kessel recognized the area depicted as a valley he had passed. He had passed a short distance down the trail when Eldalok, Denabar, the Mottled, and the others had left him to die. The image of the region was bustling with a tribe of goblins at the work of constructing a camp. These were nomads, probably, for war bands rarely brought females and young ones along on their raids. Hundreds of caves dotted the sides of these mountains, but they weren't numerous enough to hold the tribes of orcs, goblins, ogres, and even more powerful monsters. Competition for lairs was fierce, and the lesser goblin tribes were usually forced above ground, enslaved, or slaughtered. How convenient, Kessel mused, wondering if the subject of his dream had been a coincidence or a prophecy. On another sudden impulse, he sent his will through the mirror toward the goblins. The effect startled him, as one of the goblins turned, apparently confused, in the direction of the unseen force. The warriors apprehensively drew their clubs and stone-headed axes, and the females and children huddled in the back of the group. One larger goblin, the leader presumably, holding its club defensively before it, took a few cautious steps ahead of his soldiers. Kessel scratched his chin, pondering the extent of his newfound power. "Come to me," he called to the goblin chieftain. "You cannot resist." Oh boy. Just need a breather real quick. Ugh. Alright. Let's continue on. The tribe arrived at the bowl a short time later, remaining a safe distance away while they tried to figure out exactly what the tower was and where it had come from. Kessel let them marvel over the splendor of his new home, and then called again to the chieftain, compelling the goblin to approach Crishal Tirith. Against its own will, the large goblin strode from the ranks of the tribe. Fighting every step, it walked right up to the base of the tower. It couldn't see any door, for the entrance to Crishal Tirith was invisible to all except denizens of foreign plains, and those that Crenshiniban, or its wielder, allowed to enter. Kessel guided the terrified goblin into the first level of the structure. Once inside, the chieftain remained absolutely motionless, its eyes darting around nervously for some indication of the overpowering force that had summoned it to its structure of dazzling crystal. The wizard, a title rightfully imparted to the possessor of Crenshiniban, even if Kessel had never been able to earn it by his own deeds, let the miserable creature wait for a while, heightening its fear. Then he appeared at the top of the stairwell through a secret mirror door. He looked down upon the wretched creature and cackled with glee. The goblin trembled visibly when it saw Kessel. It felt the wizard's will imposing upon it once again, compelling the creature to its knees. "Who am I?" Kessel asked as the goblin groveled and whimpered. The chieftain's reply was torn from within by a power that it could not resist. "Master." So many stretches. Oh. All right, let's see what we got here. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Chapter 5. Someday. Brenor walked up the rocky slope with measured steps, his boots finding the same footholds he always used when he ascended to the high point of the southern end of the Dwarven Valley. To the people of 10 towns, who often saw the dwarf standing meditatively on the perch, this high column of stones in the rocky ridge that lined the valley had come to be known as Brunner's Climb. Just below the dwarf, to the west, were the lights of Tourmaline, and beyond them the dark waters of May Duladon, spotted occasionally by the running lights of a fishing boat whose resolute crew stubbornly refused to come ashore until they had landed a knucklehead. The dwarf was well above the tundra floor, and the lowest of the countless stars had sparkled the night. The celestial dome seemed polished by the chill breeze that had blown since your sunset, and Brenor felt as though he had escaped the bonds of earth. In this place he found his dreams, and ever they took him back to his ancient home, Mithril Hall. Home of his fathers and theirs before them, where rivers of the shining metal ran rich and deep, and the hammers of dwarven smiths rang out in praise to Moradin and Dumathoin. Brunnor was merely an unbearded boy when his people had delved too deep into the bowels of the world and had been driven out by the dark things in dark holes. He was now the eldest surviving member of his small clan, and the only one among them who had witnessed the treasures of Mithril Hall. They had made their home in the rocky valley between the two northernmost of the three lakes long before any humans, other than the barbarians, had come to Icewind Dale. They were a poor remnant of what had once been a thriving dwarven society, a band of refugees beaten and broken by the loss of their homeland and heritage. They continued to dwindle in numbers, their elders dying as much of sadness as old age. Though the mining under the fields of their region was good, the dwarves seemed destined to fade away into oblivion. When 10 towns had sprung up, though, the luck of the dwarves rose considerably. Their valley was just north of Bryn Shander, as close to the principal city as any of the fishing villages, and the humans, often warring with each other in fighting off invaders, were happy to trade for the marvelous armor and weapons that the dwarves forged. But even the betterment of their lives, Brunnor particularly longed to recover the ancient glory of his ancestors. He viewed the arrival of 10 towns as a temporary stay from a problem that would not be resolved until Mithril Hall had been recovered and restored. A cold night for so high a perch, good friend, came a call from behind. The dwarf turned around to face Dritz Doerden, though he realized that the drow would be invisible against the black backdrop of Kelvin's cairn. From this vantage point, the mountain was the only silhouette that broke the featureless line of the northern horizon. The cairn had been so named because it resembled a mound of purposely piled boulders. Barbarian legend claimed that it truly served as a grave. Certainly the valley where the dwarves now made their home did not resemble any natural landmark. In every direction, the tundra rolled on, flat and earthen. But the valley had only sparse patches of dirt sprinkled in among broken boulders and walls of solid stone. It, and the mountain of its northern border, were the only features in all of Icewind Dale with any mentionable qualities of rock, as if they had been misplaced by some god in the earliest days of creation. Dritz noted the glazed look of his friend's eyes. "You seek the sights that only your memory can see," he said, well aware of the dwarf's obsession with his ancient homeland. "The sight I'll see again," Brunnor insisted. "We'll get there, elf." "We do not even know the way." "Roads can be found," said Brunnor, "but not until you look for them." "Someday, my friend," Dritz humored. In the few years that he and Brunnor had been friends, the dwarf had constantly badgered Dritz about accompanying him on his adventure to find Mithril Hall. Dritz, though, thought the idea was foolish, for no one that he had ever spoken with had even a clue as to the location of the ancient dwarven home, and Brunnor could only remember disjointed images of the silvery halls. Still, the drow was sensitive to his friend's deepest desire, and he always answered Brunnor's pleas with a promise of someday. "We have more urgent business at the moment," Dritz reminded Brunnor. Earlier that day, in a meeting in the dwarven halls, the drow had detailed his findings to the dwarves. "You're sure they'll be coming, then?" Brunnor asked now. "Their charge will shake the stones of Kelvin's cairn. Dritz replied as he left the darkness of the mountain silhouette and joined his friend. And if 10 towns does not stand united against them, the people are doomed. Bernard settled into a crouch and turned his eyes to the south, toward the distant lights of Bryn Shander. They'll not. The stubborn fools, he muttered. They might if your people want them. Or went to them. No, growled the dwarf. We'll fight beside them if they choose to stand together, and pity then to the barbarians. Go to them, if you wish, and good luck to ye. But nothing o' the dwarves. Let us see what grit and guts the fisher folk can muster. Dritz smiled at the irony of Bernor's refusal. Both of them knew well that the drow was not trusted, not even openly welcomed in any of the towns other than Lonelywood, where their friend Regis was spokesman. Bernor marked the drow's look, and it pained him as it pained Dritz, though the elf stoically pretended otherwise. They owe you more than they'll ever know, Bernor stated, flatly, turning a sympathetic eye on his friend. They owe me nothing. Bernor shook his head. Why do ye care? He growled. Ever you're watching over the folk that show ye no goodwill. What do ye know owe to them? Dritz shrugged, hard-pressed to find an answer. Bernor was right. When the drow had first come to this land, the only one who had shown him any friendship at all was Regis. He often escorted and protected the halfling through the dangerous first legs of the journey from Lonelywood around the open tundra north of Mare Dalden, and down toward Bryn Shander. When Regis went to the principal city for business or council meetings, they had actually met on one such trek. Regis tried to flee from Dritz because he'd heard terrible rumors about him. Luckily for both of them, Regis was a halfling who was usually able to keep an open mind about people and make his own judgments concerning their character. It wasn't long before the two were fast friends. But to this day, Regis and the dwarves were the only ones in the area who considered the drow a friend. I do not know why I care, Dritz answered honestly. His eyes turned back to his ancient homeland, where loyalty was merely a device to gain an advantage over a common foe. Perhaps I care because I strive to be different from my people, he said, as much to himself as to Bernor. Perhaps I care because I am different from my people. I may be more akin to the races of the surface. That is my hope, at least. I care because I have to care about something. You are not so different, Bernor Battlehammer. We care lest our own lives be empty. Bernor cocked a curious eye. You can deny your feelings for the people of 10 towns to me, but not to yourself. Bah! Bernor snorted. Sure that I care for 'em. My folk need the trade. Stubborn, Dritz mumbled, smiling knowingly. And Canterbury? He pressed. What of the human girl who was orphaned in the raid those years ago on Tourmaline? The waif that you took in and raised as your own child? Bernor was glad that the cover of night offered some protection from his revealing blush. She lives with you still, though even you would have to admit that she is able to back her own kind. Might it be, perhaps, that you care for her, gruff dwarf? Ah, shut your mouth, Bernor grumbled. She's a serving wench and makes my life a bit easier, and don't ye go getting sappy about her. Stubborn, Dritz reiterated more loudly this time. He had one more card to play in this discussion. What of myself, then? Dwarves are not overly fond of the light elves, let alone the drow. How do you justify the friendship you have shown me? I have nothing to offer you in return but my own friendship. Why do you care? You bring me news when... Bernard stopped short, aware that Dritz had cornered him. But the drow didn't press the issue any further. So the friends watched in silence as the lights of Bryn Shander went down one by one. Despite his outward callousness, Brenor realized how true some of the drow's accusations had rung. He had come to care for the people who had settled on the banks of the three lakes. "What do you mean to do then?" the dwarf asked at length. "I mean to warn them," Dritz replied. "You underestimate your neighbors, Brenor. They're made of tougher stuff than you believe." "Agreed," said the dwarf. "My questions of their character every day are of their character. Every day we see fighting on the lakes, and always over the damned fish. The people cling to their own towns, and goblins take the others. For all they care. Now they've to show me and mine that they've the will to fight together." Dritz had to admit the truth of Brenor's observations. The fishermen had grown more competitive over the last couple of years, as the knucklehead trout took to the deeper waters of the lakes and became harder to catch. Cooperation among the towns was at a low point, as each town tried to gain an economic advantage over the revival towns on its lake. "There's a council in Bryn Shander in 2 days," Dritz continued. "I believe that we still have some time before the barbarians come, though I fear for any delays. I do not believe that we would be able to bring the spokesmen together any sooner. It will take me that long to properly instruct Regis on the course of action that he must take with his peers, for he must carry the tidings of the coming invasion." "Rumblebelly?" snorted Brenor, using the name he had tagged on Regis for the halfling's insatiable appetite. "He sits on the council for no better reason than to keep his stomach well stocked. They'll hear him less than they'd hear yourself, elf." "You underestimate the halfling. More so even than you underestimate the people of 10 towns, answered Dritz. "Remember, always, that he carries the stone." "Bah, a fine-cut gem, but no more," Bernard insisted. "I've seen it myself, and it holds no spell on me. The magic is too subtle for the eyes of a dwarf, and perhaps not strong enough to penetrate your thick skull," laughed Dritz. "But it is there that I see it clearly, and know the legend of such a stone. Regis may be able to influence the council more than you would believe, and certainly more than I could. Let us hope so, for you know as well as I that some of the spokesmen might be reluctant to pursue any plan of unity, whether in their arrogant independence or in their belief that a barbarian raid upon some of their less protected rivals might actually help their own selfish ambitions. Bryn Shander remains the key, but the principal city will only be spurred to action if the major fishing towns, Targos in particular, join in." "You know that East Haven'll help," said Brenor. They're ever ones for bringing all of the towns together. And Lonelywood, too, with Regis speaking for them. But Kemp of Targos surely believes that his walled city is powerful enough to stand alone, whereas its rival, Tourmaline, would be hard-pressed to hold back the horde. He's not likely to join anything that includes Tourmaline, and you're in for more trouble than drow. For without Kemp, you'll never get Koenig of Denival to shut up. But that is where Regis comes in," Dritz explained. "The ruby he possesses can do wondrous things, I assure you. Again, you speak of the power of the stone, Bernor. But Rumblebelly claims that his master old had 12 of the things," he reasoned. "Mighty magics don't come in dozens." Riga said that his master had 12 similar stones, Dritz corrected. In truth, the halfling had no way of knowing if all 12 or any of the others were magical. And why would the man have given the only one a power to rumble barely? Dritz left the question unanswered, but his silence soon led Brenor to the same inescapable conclusion. Regus had a way of collecting things that didn't belong to him, and though the halfling had explained the stone as a gift. Well, we're getting there. We're on chapter 6. Got 3 more chapters, including this chapter, and then the epilogue. Just give me one moment. Okay. All right. Chapter 6. Bryn Shander. Bryn Shander was unlike any of the other communities of 10 towns. Its proud pennant flew high from the top of a hill in the middle of the dry tundra between the 3 lakes, just south of the southern tip of the Dwarven Valley. No ships flew the flags of this city, and it had no docks on any of the lakes. Yet there was little argument that it was not only the geographical hub of the region, but the center of activity as well. This was where the major merchant caravans from Luskan put in, where the dwarves came to trade, and where the vast majority of craftsmen, scrimshanders, and scrimshaw evaluators were housed. Proximity to Bryn Shander was second only to the quantity of fish hooked in determining the success and size of the fishing towns. Thus, Tourmaline and Targos on the southeastern banks of Mare Dalden, and Cair Conig and Cair Dinavel on the western shores of Lac Dinishare. 4 towns less than a day's journey from the principal city were the dominant towns on the lakes. High walls surrounded Bryn Shander as much protection from the biting wind as from invading goblins or barbarians. Inside, the buildings were similar to those of the other towns. Low wooden structures, except that in Bryn Shander they were more tightly packed together and often subdivided to house several families. Congested as it was, though, there was a measure of comfort and security in the city, the largest taste of civilization a person could find for 400 long and desolate miles. Regus always enjoyed the sounds and smells that greeted him when he walked through the iron-bound wooden gates on the northern wall of the principal city, though on a smaller scale than the great cities of the south. The bustle and shouts of Bryn Shander's open markets and plentiful street vendors reminded him of his days back in Calimport. And as in Calimport, the people of Bryn Shander's street were a cross-section of every heritage that the realms had to offer. Tall, dark-skinned desert folk mingled among fair-skinned travelers from the Moonshays. The loud boasts of swarthy southerners and robust mountain men trading fanciful tales of love and battle in one of the many taverns echoed on nearly every street corner. And Regis took it all in, for though the location was changed, the noise remained the same, and he closed his eyes as he skipped along down one of the narrow streets he could almost recapture the zest for life that he had known for years before in Calimport. This time, though, the halfling's business was so grave that it dampened even his ever-lifted spirits. He had been horrified at the drow's grim news, and was nervous about being the messenger who would deliver it to the council. Away from the noisy market section of the city, Regis passed the palatial home of Cassius, the spokesman of Bryn Shander. This was the largest and most luxurious building in all of 10 towns, with the columned front and the bas-relief artwork adorning all of its walls. It had originally been built for the meetings of the 10 spokesmen, but as interest in the councils had died away, and Cassius, skilled in diplomacy and not above using strong-arm tactics, had appropriated the place as his official residence and moved the council hall to a vacant warehouse tucked away in a remote corner of the city. Several of the other spokesmen had complained about the change, but though the fishing towns could often exert some influence of the principal city in the matters of public concern, they had little recourse in an issue as trivial to the general populace as this. Cassius understood his city's position well and knew how to keep most of the other communities under his thumb. The militia of Bryn Shander could defeat the combined forces of any 5 of the other 9 towns combined. And Cassius's officers held a monopoly on connections to the necessary marketplaces in the south. The other spokesmen might grumble about the change in the meeting place, but their dependence on the principal city would prevent them from taking any actions against Cassius. Regis was the last to enter the small hall. He looked around at the 9 men who had gathered at the table and realized how out of place he truly was. He had been elected spokesman because nobody else in Lonelywood cared enough to want to sit on the council. But his peers had attained their positions through valorous and heroic deeds. They were leaders of their communities and men who had organized the structure and defenses of the towns. Each of these spokesmen had seen a score of battles and more, for goblin and barbarian raiders descended upon 10 towns more often than sunny days. It was a simple rule of life in Icewind Dale that if you couldn't fight, you couldn't survive, and the spokesmen of the council were some of the most proficient fighters in all of 10 towns. Regis had never been intimidated by the spokesman before, because normally he had nothing to say at council. Lonelywood, a secluded town hidden away in a small, thick wood of fir trees, asked for nothing from anyone, and with the insignificant fishing fleet and the other 3 towns that shared Mare Dalden, with imposed no demands upon it. Regis never offered an opinion unless pressed, and had been careful always to cast his vote on an issue in the way of the general consensus. And if the council was split on an issue, Regis simply followed the lead of Cassius. In 10 towns, though, one couldn't go wrong by following Bryn Shander. This day, though, Regis found that he was intimidated by the council, The grim news that he bore would make him vulnerable to their bullying tactics and often angry reprisals. He focused his attention on the two most powerful spokesmen, Cassius of Bryn, Shander, and Kemp of Targos. As they sat at the head of the rectangular table and chatted, Kemp looked the part of rugged frontiersman, not too tall, but barrel-chested, with gnarled and knotted arms and a stern demeanor that frightened friend and foe alike. Cassius, though, hardly seemed a warrior. He was small of frame and neatly trimmed gray hair, and a face that never showed a hint of stubble. His big, bright blue eyes forever seemed locked into an inner contentment. But anyone who had ever seen the spokesman from Bryn Shander raise a sword in battle, or maneuver his charge on the field, had no doubts concerning his fighting prowess, or his bravery. Regus truly liked the man, yet he was careful not to fall into a situation that left him vulnerable. Cassius had earned a reputation for getting what he wanted at another's expense. "Come to order," Cassius commanded, rapping his gavel on the table. The host spokesman always opened the meeting with the formalities of order, reading the titles and official proposals that had originally been intended to give the council an aura of importance, impressing especially the ruffians that sometimes showed up to speak for the more remote communities. But now, with the degeneration of the council as a whole, the formalities of order served only to delay the end of the meeting, to the regret of all 10 spokesmen. And consequently, the formalities were pared down more and more each time the group gathered, and there had been talk of eliminating them altogether. When the list had finally been completed, Cassius turned to the important issues, the first item on the agenda. "The first item on the agenda," he said, hardly glancing at the notes that were laid out before him, "concerns the territorial dispute between the sister cities, Caer Konig and Caer Dineval, on Lac Dineshire. I see the Dorim Lugger of Caer Konig has brought the documents that he promised at the last meeting, so I turn the floor to him, Spokesman Lugar." Dorman Lugar, a gaunt, dark, complacent man whose eyes never seemed to stop darting about nervously, nearly leaped out of his chair when he was introduced. "I have in my hand," he yelled, his upraised fist closed about an old parchment, "the original agreement between Caer Konig and Caer Dineval, signed by the leaders of each town." He shot an accusing finger in the direction of the spokesman from Caer Dineval, "including your own signature, Jensen Brent." "An agreement signed during a time of friendship and in the spirit of goodwill," retorted Jensen Brett, a younger golden-haired man with innocent face that often gave him an advantage over people who judged him naive. "Unroll the parchment, Spokesman Luger, and let the council view it. They shall see that it makes no provisions whatsoever for East Haven." He looked around at the other spokesman. East Haven could hardly be called even a hamlet when the agreement to divide the lake in half was signed. He explained, and not for the first time. "They have not a single boat to put in the water." "Fellow spokesman," Dorim Luger yelled, jolting some of them from the lethargy that already begun to creep in. This same debate had dominated the last 4 councils, with no ground gained by either side. The issue held little importance and interest for any of the 2 spokesmen and the spokesman from East Haven. Surely Caer Konig cannot be blamed for the rise of East Haven, pleaded Dorman Luger. Who could have foreseen the Eastway? He asked, referring to the straight and smooth road of East Haven, or that East Haven had constructed to Bryn Shander. It was an ingenious move, and proved a boon to the small town on the southeastern corner of Lancashire. Combing the appeal of a remote community with easy access to Bryn Shander had made East Haven the fastest growing community in all of 10 towns, with a fishing fleet that had swelled to nearly rival the boats of Caerdinval. Who indeed? Retorted Jensen Brent, now a bit of fluster showing through his calm facade. It is obvious that East Haven's growth has put Caerdinval in stiff competition for the southern waters of the lake, while Sir Konig sails freely in the northern half. Yet Sir Konig has flatly refused to renegotiate the original terms to compensate for the imbalance. We cannot prosper under such conditions. Regis knew that he had to act before the argument between Brent and Luger got out of control. 2 previous meetings had been adjourned because of their volatile debates, and Regis couldn't let this council disintegrate before he had told them of the impending barbarian attack. He hesitated, having to admit to himself once again that he had no options and could not back away from this urgent mission. His haven would be destroyed if he said nothing. Although Dritz had reassured him of the power he possessed, he retained his doubts about the true magic of the stone. Yet due to his own insecurity, a trait common among little folk, Regis found himself blindly trusting in Dritz's judgment. The drow was possibly the most knowledgeable person he had ever known, with a list of experiences far beyond the tales that Regis could tell. Now was the time for action, and the halfling was determined to give the drow's plan a try. He closed his fingers around the little wooden gavel that was set out on the table before him. It felt unfamiliar to his touch, and he realized that this was the first time he had ever used the instrument. He tapped it lightly on the wooden table, but the others were intent on the shouting match that had erupted between Luger and Brent. Regis reminded himself of the urgency of the drow's news once again, and boldly pounded the gavel down. The other spokesmen turned immediately to the halfling, blank expressions stamped upon their faces. Regis rarely spoke at the meetings, and then only when cornered with direct question. Cassius of Bryn Shander brought his heavy gavel down. The council recognized the spokesman from Lonelywood, he said, and from his uneven tone, Regis could guess that he struggled to address the halfling's request for the floor seriously. The fellow spokesman, Regis began tentatively, his voice crackling into a squeak. With all due respect to the seriousness of debate between the spokesman from Sir Dinaval and Sir Konig, I believe that we have a more urgent problem to discuss. Jensen Brent and Dorman Luger were livid at being interrupted, but the others eyed the halfling curiously. Good start, Regis thought. I've got their full attention. He cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice and sound a bit more impressive. I have learned beyond doubt that the barbarian tribes are gathering for a united attack on 10 Towers. Though he tried to make the announcement dramatic, Regis found himself facing 9 apathetic and confused men. Unless we form an alliance, Regis continued in the same urgent tones, the horde will overrun our communities one by one, slaughtering any who dare to oppose them. Certainly, Spokesman Regis of Lonelywood, said Cassius in a voice that he meant to be calming, but was, in effect, condescending. We have weathered barbarian raids before. There is no need for— Not like this one, Regis cried. All the tribes have come together. The raids before matched one tribe against one city, and usually we fared well. But how would Tourmaline or Caer Konig, or even Bryn Shander, stand against the combined tribes of Icewind Dale? Some of the spokesmen settled back into their chairs to contemplate the halfling's words. The rest began talking among themselves, some in distress, some in angry disbelief. Finally, Cassius pounded his gavel again, calling the hall to silence. Then, with familiar bravado, Kemp of Targos slowly rose from his seat. "May I speak, friend Cassius?" he asked with unnecessary politeness. "Perhaps I may be able to put this grave pronouncement in the proper light." Regis and Dritz had made some assumptions about the alliances when they had planned the halflings' actions at the council. They knew the East Haven, founded and thriving on the principle of brotherhood among the communities of 10 towns, would openly embrace the concept of a common defense against the barbarian horde. Likewise, Tourmaline and Lonelywood, the 2 most accessible and rated towns of the 10, would gladly accept any offers to help. Yet even spokesman Orgwal of Tourmaline, who had so much to gain from a defensive alliance, would hedge and hold his silence if Kemp of Targos refused to accept the plan. Targos was the largest and mightiest of the 9 fishing villages, with a fleet more than twice the size of the second largest. "Fellow members of the council," Kemp began, leaning forward over the table to loom larger in the eyes of his peers. "Let us learn more about the halfling's tale before we begin to worry. We have fought off barbarian invaders and worse enough times to be confident that the defenses of even the smallest of our towns are adequate." Regis felt his tension growing as Kemp rolled into his speech, building on points designed to destroy the halfling's credibility. Dritz had decided early on in their planning that Kemp of Targos was the key. Regis knew the spokesman better than the drow, and knew that Kemp would not be easily manipulated. Kemp illustrated the tactics of the powerful town of Targos in his own mannerisms. He was large and bullying, often taking to sudden fits of violent rage, and intimidated when that intimidated even Cassius. Regis had tried to steer Dritz away from this part of their plan, but the drow was adamant. If Targos agrees to accept the alliance with Lonelywood, Dritz had reason, Tourmaline will gladly join the Bremen. Being the only other village on the lake, will have no choice but to go along. Bryn Shander will certainly not oppose a unified alliance of the 4 towns on the largest and most prosperous lake. And East Haven will make 6 in the pact, a clear majority. The rest would then have no choice but to join the effort. Dritz had believed that Sir Denival and Sir Koenig, fearing that East Haven would receive special consideration. Sorry, that was random. Oh, sorry to stop suddenly. My eyes are fucking with me. God, I need to get new glasses. Oh. Oh. Oh, one moment. Oh. I'm almost there. Oh, my eyes are fucking with me, though. Okay, come on, body. Come on, eyes. I might need to get my eye appointment set up sooner than later, rather than later. God, these glasses are so fucked. Okay. I'm sorry, guys. I need to stop it here. That way I can rest my eyes before tonight's stream. Yeah, my eyesight is all sorts of messed up right now. Okay. I need the new glasses. I got a good amount of reading done though, so that's good. We might continue reading tomorrow, but I'm not sure yet. My glasses are just really fucking with my eyes right now. Like, things are starting to get a little blurry. So, I'll be back at 8 for date night. And I'll see you then.